Hello everyone. Hope you all are doing well, and we are back again with another video. And the topic for discussion today we have is GraphQL and GraphQL injection. So let's get started. So first of all, let's try to understand what is GraphQL. So GraphQL is pretty much same as REST APIs, and it is a query language that sends and receives structured data. And the advantage it has over REST APIs is that it is more flexible than the REST APIs. So how is it? So in GraphQL, it is possible to query a particular table and ask to only return only a subset of the values. It will not return us the entire table, or but it will only return us whatever we have asked it for. So it will be like a subset of values, or the only specific values that we need or need to work on. Okay. So in GraphQL, there is only one endpoint, and we only query this specific endpoint to send our query and to retrieve information. So in GraphQL, like REST APIs, also has different types of queries. So the types of queries can be get operations, uh, update operations on the data, delete operations, modify operations. So depending upon the operations, there are three types of queries. So first is the query operation, which means the get operation. In this, we try to read the data from the GraphQL database. The second we have is mutation operations. And mutations operations are similar like post, put, and delete methods in HTTP communication. So mutation operations are usually used for updating the information in the database, or adding new information, modifying existing information. And the third we have is subscriptions operations. So here what happens is our client receives data or updates data in real time. So this is mostly used in applications like IoT and accessing data from sensors, updating the data uh, to the database based upon the changes in the clients. Okay. So how do we discover that the application is using GraphQL? So if you observe the endpoints in the applications, so they will be something like GraphQL, GraphIQL. Oh, let's make a simple list. GraphIQL. Again, you might find directories like GraphQL slash GraphIQL. Again, anything has having GraphQL in the URL. So this also is a common endpoint that you might find. Again, other endpoints like API slash GPL, etc. And it is also possible that developer has changed the name of the endpoint to something completely random. So it is possible that they can entirely change the name of this endpoint. You can also identify the endpoint based off the queries made by the application. You can have a look at the syntax of the traffic of the queries to the endpoints, and it can be also used to identify that the backend application is using GraphQL. One thing to note regarding GraphQL for especially for security researchers and pen testers is that GraphQL implementation doesn't enforce any type of authentication by default, and it is up to the developer to design and implement the same. Also, it is necessary to implement authentication in all endpoints. It is possible that the entire application itself has some sort of authentication, and it is verifying if the request made to the application are from an authenticated user, but the GraphQL endpoint has been left out. It is definitely a test case. So definitely it is very important to check if the GraphQL endpoint has, you know, verifying the authentication. Okay. So now that we have some background about GraphQL, let's see what we can do uh, in an application that is using GraphQL. So first thing that we do, like after having an understanding that the application is using GraphQL, is we will try to enumerate the endpoint itself to see what all data is there in it. So GraphQL exposes its schema and structures to a query commonly known as GraphQL introspection. So what is GraphQL introspection? It is often used by the developers in the development phase to understand and work with API, types of fields, etc. It is often left open in production environments as well. So, and you can also use it to enumerate the API. So it's not really a security risk, like leaving this introspection open in the production environment. But if the proper authentication and authorization mechanisms, if they have been properly implemented, then only it is the case. If not, it will definitely help an attacker to better understand the API and what all types of queries are supported by the GraphQL endpoint. So let's see how we can enumerate the uh, information about the GraphQL endpoint. So first of all, here we have is a GraphQL endpoint. As you can see, the endpoint itself is named as GraphQL. If you see, it says the get query is missing. So mostly what you can see in GraphQL implementations is that it will always use post request, and in the body of the post request will be the query itself that is to be run on the GraphQL database. So here we have a request which shows us the query that we can use to introspect the GraphQL endpoint. So let's note this query down for future use as well. So depending upon the implementation of the GraphQL, sometimes you will have to use these quotes, use the query in this syntax itself, or like you can also sometimes have to use only this in the post method, post body, and will not have to use the quotes. So what you can do is you can see the application, how it is communicating with the GraphQL endpoint, and have an understanding of how you can use it. But mostly what is the most important thing is like this part. So this is the main part, and you just have to understand where do you have to use this part, use this introspection query in the post data to query the application. So in our case, it is using in a JSON format. And while it is using like while you are working with this, you should always check the communication, sorry, the content type of the application. Is it application slash JSON, or you might face some errors in the response. So here we are sending this query and we have a response. So in the response, the place to look for supported types of queries will be something like, query root queries, or something similar. Okay, rest of the information here, as you can see, like type and all these fields, is the supporting information required and used by the queries here, like as you can see here. Here we have the query itself, and this is the user query, and rest of the information that you can see here is like, user will accept username and password, these fields. So now that we have enumerated the types of queries that we can run along with the supporting all information. So this query actually will contain all the data, but sometimes the database can be very big and you might receive a lot of information here. So it is better, while working with large sets of data, that you can further enumerate the different types of queries based on the query or mutation and subscription types. So next what we will do is we will try to get the query type of data. Okay, so this resembles to get request, as we had discussed previously. So here we are selecting query type, and we send the request, and we get in the response is that user user query is supported by the database, GraphQL database, and we don't really have any specific arguments mentioned here that are required for querying it. So this here can also be used, the same query can also be used to find the arguments that are required uh, by the query. If you see here, same, this is the same query, and we are also getting the arguments. So here if we change that query type to, let's say, mutation type, as you can see, it is we are receiving a null response. So that means the database does not have any mutation type of queries supported. Also we will check for the subscription type. As you can see, the subscription type is also not supported by this database. So as of now, what we have is the only user is a query type query that we can run on the database itself. And let's see how we can use it. So now that we have all the information, the query and the arguments that it accepts, let's try to run this query. Okay, so before we run this query, we should have a look. Before moving on, let's save the query type and arguments query for our future use. Okay, so same can be used for arguments as well. So next what we have is the fields. So here we will mention the query that we want to get the fields for, supported fields, and here we click on send, and you can see that username and password are the supported fields. That means the user uh, table will have username and password fields under which there will be different values. Like username could be admin and password could be admin123, something like that. So this is like, the name of table and the fields that the table will contain. So let's run the query now. So this is the syntax for the query. Like in our case, again it could differ as per your implementation in the backend. It could be something similar to this, or it could also be possible that only only this part, like, only this much information is being sent in the post body of the request. Here if we send the query, we have a response, and we can see that the username and the password fields and the corresponding values in the same. As you can see, this does not implement any authentication. Let's try to delete this cookie and let's see if the application responds. Yes. So this is a vulnerable GraphQL application, we can say. Without any authentication, we are able to get data from the username and the password fields. Okay. So now that we have worked on example, let's have a look at one more example to understand this better. So here I have one more GraphQL instance. It is running on a local host instance, and we will be doing the same previous operations on this endpoint to find and exploit the vulnerabilities. So in the last example, first thing that we did was introspection queries. So here, as you can see, the query structure is similar, just that it also has a new parameter, variables null. So I got this from the application itself, and I just took it to the repeater tab and have pasted the introspection query. So if you see, it is the same that we have worked previously with, and let's send it. So here in the response, the important part that we will be looking for is the root queries. Here we can see, and the supported queries are get articles and get users. Also we have a list of root mutations. So these are the queries, supported queries, and these are the supported mutations. So in supported mutations we have update users. So there is no subscriptions, but in the last example we did not have any opportunity to try exploitation of the mutation type queries, but we do have in this example. So now that we have introspected and got a lot of information regarding the uh, database, the GraphQL endpoint that it stores, let's move on to our next step. So next step is getting information about supported uh, queries and mutations. So here again, the query type, so we are running a query and getting all the arguments supported by the uh, query types. Here we send, and here we see, as we seen in the previous request, get articles and get users. So now also we will try to enumerate the mutation types. So in mutation types we have update users, and in the arguments you can see that there is a mandatory argument called user input, and user input should contain some fields to understand for the database which fields are to be updated. So also these get articles and get users will contain different fields, and let's try to get the different fields for the same. Okay, send this to repeater again. So this was the query that we used for fields. So we have get articles and get users. It's possible that we have some error in the query, but the same information that we will be receiving from this query, we have also received in the introspection query itself. Here, let's try to see. Here we have the get users and get articles. For the articles, there are these three fields: ID, title, and views. And for the users, we have the fields of ID, username, email, password, and level. All right, moving on. So before we move to mutations, let's try to get the query type. Okay, so here we can see that we have the get users query that we will be running, and the information that we wish to get is the username, ID, and the password of the users. So as you can see over here, we have two users in the database, and username, here we have the username, password, and the ID of the two users. We can also add fields, add supported fields like email, and receive the same in the response. I think there was one more field called level. Here you can see we have the level field as well. So this is regarding the get query, like query type operations on this specific endpoint. So the next one that we will try to so the thing is, like again, this application does not have any authentication. This application might have, but the GraphQL endpoint does not have any authentication. And also it is possible to enumerate information of all users by running queries without any authentication. So these can lead to some serious high severity vulnerabilities. So here we have a query of a mutation type. So in this query, before the query itself, we have mentioned that this is a mutation. And again, depending upon the application, so you would have to mention only mutation or mutation type, something similar. So either you can try similar keywords, or have a look at the application itself and try to find what is the keyword that it is using. So in our case, it is only mutation. And again, if we look at the introspection output, we have update users. Update users is the query itself. So we have mentioned the query. In the circular brackets, we have the required field, that is user input. In the arguments we had seen, for mutation types, update users, the required field is user input. So this argument is definitely required for the uh, for using this mutation. So here we have mentioned the user input, and based upon the users table, the fields that we will be updating are like supported fields that we can use are ID, level, username, password. Yes, ID, username, email, password, and level fields. So here, let's try to update some information. For user ID 1, let's change the level to 2. So as you can see, once we have changed the level to 2, previously it was level 1, both the users were level 1. But now once we have updated, it is level 2. We can also try some new level. It's level 3 if you see. And also here we can mention what is the data that is to be returned. So as of now, what we have done was in the when the application was designed, so only username was present in the response. So when the application was designed, this was the query that was there. So whenever we updated any information of the user, the updated information, and it responded with uh, the user whose information was updated. So as you can see here, we have the Theo user who was updated. If we change the ID, it is the John user who has been updated. So one more thing that we can exploit here is in this second field, we can add more parameters which are supported by that table and extract the information. So here if we add fields like password, we are able to view the password uh, of the users. Again, if we add fields like level, we can see the level of the user. Also email, if we add, we are able to view the email of the user. Changing the ID, we are able to view the same of the other user as well. So in an ideal case, there should be some sort of authentication for these kind of sensitive request, and also based upon the user should only be having access to his own data and not access to the data of other users as well. So these are the types of vulnerabilities that might arise due to insecure implementation of the GraphQL database. So I hope this video was useful for everyone, and thank you for watching. I will see you guys next time. Also, I will add the links to these queries. I will make a page, GitHub page, and save these queries there for you guys to access. And also there are many automated tools as well that we can use for all the tasks that we perform manually right now. So I would highly recommend that before you move on to the automated tools, to exploit these vulnerabilities or try to find and communicate with the GraphQL endpoints manually, because in realistic scenarios, in my experience also, what happens is many of these tools are not aware of the syntax that the GraphQL endpoint accepts, and many of the times these tools don't work out of the box. So what is needed is like, you need to understand what is the syntax to be used and modify the syntax in the tool itself, so that you can use the tool effectively without facing much challenges. So that's all for this time. Thank you guys.